Hi everybody, happy Tuesday. So yesterday you read 3 stories, we've listened to 3 stories about explorers and exploration. So before we start anything today, before you listen to the read aloud, I have an activity for you. I want you to think in your head about what you remember about yesterday and draw a little picture to show me or to show anybody what you have learned so far. Okay, so I'm going to give you about 3 minutes and go. You can pause me. All right, so 3 minutes are up, not in real life. You paused me. And I'm going to show you my picture. I drew a little cartoon. This is Christopher Columbus. He's sailing across the ocean here, and he has a little map. He has Tuscaloosa's map in his hand. And he's like, ha ha, I'm going to be rich, because he thinks he's going to find gold and spices. And this is where he's coming from, Spain and Europe, and he's sailing across to underneath Florida to the Caribbean. I think I spelled Caribbean wrong. Whoops. So this is my little picture. I want you to draw a picture and show your parents or somebody at your house and show them what you've learned so far. Okay? All right, so today's read aloud is called 1492, a year that changed the world. So we're going to get started. You're just going to listen today, and then I'm going to have some questions for you to talk about at the end of the read aloud. Do any of you know what important event in world history took place in the year 1492? It is said that in this year, the explorer Christopher Columbus discovered several islands off the coasts of North and South America, in what is now known as the Caribbean Sea. Here's a little rhyme that you can use to help you remember what Columbus set off on his when Columbus set off on his important voyage. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Columbus and other Europeans had known nothing about these islands prior to his voyage. Sometimes people say that Columbus discovered the Americas. But did he truly discover something new? Columbus was actually looking for a different part of the world. Does anyone know what lands Columbus was trying to reach? Christopher Columbus was trying to sail to a part of Asia known at that time as the Indies. When Christopher Columbus and other Europeans at that time talked about the Indies, they were thinking about a part of the continent of Asia known today as India, as well as many surrounding islands. He wanted to sail to the area known as the Indies because he had heard and read that they were wealthy lands, full of gold and spices. What Columbus actually ended up finding is an area now referred to as the Caribbean Islands, or the West Indies. Even though Columbus was sure he had reached parts of Asia we now call the East Indies. The East Indies are the parts of Asia that lay south of China and north of Australia. They include the present-day nations of India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, as well as some other parts of Asia. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were grown in the East Indies. Then they were carried to other parts of the world by spice traders. The spice traders transported spices to Europe by going through the Middle East. It was a long and dangerous journey. The traders had to load the spices onto pack animals, like donkeys or camels, and then lead these animals across deserts and mountains, along dangerous roads where the traders might be robbed or killed. So, just this picture is showing us it took a lot of time and money to transport spices to Europe, and that's why spices were so expensive. That's why Christopher Columbus wanted to find a way across the water instead of having to take camels. In the 1400s, Europeans were looking for a better way to get to the spice-producing lands known as the Spice Islands, in the area they called the Indies. They figured if they could find a way to sail there, they could fill their ships with spices, sail home, sell the spices, and get rich. The possibility of getting rich, as well as becoming famous for finding new routes and discoveries, inspired a lot of people to take the risks and explore uncharted land and water. Christopher Columbus was only one of many men thinking about the Indies and the money that could be made if one could find a way to sail there. Columbus was born in the city of Genoa, Italy. In Italy, he was known as Cristoforo Colombo. As a young man, he had worked as a sailor and a map maker. He had sailed all around the Mediterranean Sea, along the northwestern coast of Africa, and as far north as England. Columbus had also reached had also read the reports of Marco Polo, an Italian merchant who had traveled to China almost 200 years earlier. Columbus knew that the Earth was a sphere, or shaped like a ball. Most educated men of his day knew this. However, there were lots of disagreements about how big the Earth was. Most people thought the Earth was pretty big, but a few skeptics thought it was not all that big. Columbus was one of the skeptics. He thought the Earth was a lot smaller than most people thought, and that led him to propose his enterprise of the Indies. Everyone knew that the Indies were on the other side of the world, but Columbus thought the Earth was small, so the other side might not be far away. It might even be possible to get there by sailing around the world to the west. That was Christopher Columbus's bold idea that he proposed. Unfortunately, there were two big problems with Columbus's idea. The first problem was that Columbus was wrong about the size of the Earth. The Earth is actually much larger than he thought, and that meant that the East Indies are much farther away from Europe than that he realized. So here's Spain, here's the East Indies, and it's not quite as close as he thought. The second problem was that there was something besides ocean between Europe and Asia. There is a large block of land, the Americas. Columbus convinced the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, to be his sponsors, funding his voyage of sailing west to find the East Indies. Columbus set sail in August of 1492 with 3 ships. Does anyone remember the names of the ships in his fleet? That's right, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Columbus sailed west for 5 weeks. After a while, the sailors started to get worried and scared about how far they had sailed. Nobody had ever sailed so far west from Europe. Then one day, a sailor sighted land. Columbus became excited. He thought he had reached Asia and the East Indies. In fact, he had landed on one of the islands in the Bahamas, off the coast of North America. Columbus and his men explored the island. They staked a flag and claimed the island for the King and Queen of Spain. They made contact with the Native Americans who lived there, the Taino. Columbus called these people Indians because he thought he had sailed to an island in or near the East Indies. The native people Columbus met were peaceful and friendly. They traded with the Europeans. Columbus and his men gave the native people beads and bells. These items were considered cheap to Europeans, but the natives had long valued trade goods from distant places. In return, the native people gave the Spaniards food, fresh water, and colorful parrots. They each gave the other something that was plentiful on their continent, but rare on the other. A few of the natives had golden earrings or nose rings. Columbus and his men tried to find out where the gold came from. The Taino and the Spaniards made signs and gestures to communicate because they did not speak the same language. The Taino pointed to other islands. Long before Columbus arrived in the West Indies, trade occurred regularly between the people of the different islands. Their gestures were hard to understand, but the Spaniards thought the native people were saying that there were places not so far away where gold could be found. Columbus sailed off, looking for islands of gold and spices. He visited several islands in the Caribbean Sea. On December 6, 1492, he began exploring a big island he decided to name La Isla Hispaniola, or the Island of Spain, for the land from where he had sailed. 2 weeks later, on Christmas Day, the Santa Maria got stuck on a rock off the coast of Hispaniola. Columbus could not get the ship afloat, so he told his men to use the wood and supplies from the ship to build a fort on Hispaniola. 39 men volunteered to stay behind at the fort when the time came for Columbus to sail back to Spain to report his findings to the King and Queen. On his return voyage to Spain, Columbus took some of the native people on board as prisoners to show proof to the King and Queen that he had really reached the Indies. On the way back across the Atlantic, Columbus wrote a report for the King and Queen. He described having discovered and claimed several islands in honor of Spain. Once he arrived in Spain, Columbus presented Ferdinand and Isabella with the natives and shared many facts about the islands he had discovered. But Columbus also exaggerated. Just so you know, exaggerated means sort of overstating something, kind of lying a little about something being better than it really is or worse than it really is. So if I'm exaggerating, I could say, I'm the best and smartest person I know. But that's exaggerating because I'm not that smart. I'm smart, but I'm not the best. He called the island of Hispaniola a miracle, describing it like heaven on earth. He said it had good harbors, rich soil, lots of spices, and rivers full of gold. Columbus boasted that the other islands he had visited were full of spices, but really, he and his crew were unfamiliar with the exotic plants and trees that produced spices. Columbus more boldly exaggerated when it came to gold. He told the king and queen that Hispaniola was absolutely full of gold. He said there was gold in the rivers, gold in the fields, gold in vast mines, gold just waiting to be claimed. Columbus did not want to tell the king and queen only about the few natives wearing golden earrings and the few flakes in the rivers of Hispaniola that he believed were gold. Columbus reported all of this in hopes of convincing the king and queen to sponsor another voyage to what he thought were the islands just off the coast of China. As you have heard, Columbus had read books by Marco Polo and other merchants who described China and the area known as the Indies as wealthy areas with flourishing trade. Columbus combined what he had read with what he had seen in the place he believed to be the East Indies, and concluded that there had to be more riches waiting to be discovered. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were so pleased by his findings that they decided to fund another voyage. Okay, so that's the end of the reading. I have some questions that I'd like you to answer, and these are the questions right here. So the first question is, who were Columbus's sponsors on his enterprise to the Indies? Remember, sponsors means who were the people who were paying for him to do this trip? I want you to think about that, and you can either write your answers down, you can tell somebody who might be at home with you, or you can just answer the question out loud in front of the screen. Okay, number 2. How did Columbus first interact with the natives he met on the island? So, was he nice to the natives? What did he do to them? What did he say to them? Write it down or say it out loud. Okay, and number 3. How did the Europeans and the natives communicate with each other? Were they able to speak the same language? And number 4, why was it important for Columbus to find a new route to the East Indies? Why not just take one of the old ones that somebody already knew about? Okay, and when you're done, the next thing you're going to do is read Chapter 3 in your reader. It's called Navigation in the Age of Exploration, and you're going to answer activity page 2.1, this one right here. So please do this in your activity books when you're done with the reading. And that's it for today.